Welcome to another video by your friend Matthew. I'm coming at you, coming to you from South Georgia in my final days of being here, and I've been having a good time recording these videos. And I'm taking in this walk as I do every day. It's one of my favorite parts about being here. It's one of my favorite parts of any given day. And I'm allowing my surroundings to penetrate my senses and to fill my soul. And speaking of soul, I want to talk more on this video about what I see, or what I've outlined as a possible first step of soul cultivation. I put out a video pretty recently about cultivating the soulscape, and it's something I've been thinking about for quite some time now, and something I've been practicing too, of course. Thank goodness. If I was not practicing it, I wouldn't feel very justified in talking about it. And so it's a philosophy and a practice. And those are the kinds of philosophies that I'm most interested in. And so there's much to be said here. Let me just get right to it in terms of this first step. So, as I said in that video, the first step in soul cultivation, according to my vision, is to train the puppy mind. And so our default state, I would say, it's safe to say that at least for most of us, including myself, our default mental state and inner state is like a puppy, in the sense that it is kind of like my dog is doing right now. My dog is wandering around this pine forest with me, and she's sniffing around and engaging with whatever catches her attention. And she's highly stimulated by a wide assortment of things. And anyways, yeah, I think that if you sit with your mind for even a brief period of time, you will probably realize that it is somewhat like a puppy. It is distracted, and it is kind of just going in endless loops and cycles. And, you know, if you follow your breath for just a minute, or you try to, or any sort of, concentration practice or mindfulness practice, you will realize that your mind is kind of more out of control than you might have assumed. And that's okay, that's just the way it is. So our default state, our default mental state is the puppy mind. And in general, our inner environment is, kind of like a wilderness. That's what I've been calling it. We have this inner wilderness of activity and content. And in order to start cultivating the soul in the way I think of it, since I see the soul as the consecrated inner environment, and since I see consecration as facilitating heightened attention, intention, and care, so as we're cultivating the soul landscape, the soulscape, we are approaching our inner environment with heightened attention, intention, and care. Which I think for most of us, we don't usually do that, right? I know I didn't do that for a long time, consciously, really, but So I think most of us, it's safe to say that most of us don't consciously approach our inner environments that way. And it's a lot harder to approach our inner environments that way if we're just kind of locked into the puppy mind, right? Because the puppy mind's not very free. It's not spacious and it's not free. And therefore, I think that's why it's a good first step to sit with the puppy mind, to observe the puppy mind, and to train the puppy mind. And so I want to just kind of bring in a few of my influences when it comes to this and give you a couple references that you can kind of go into if you're interested in this sort of thing. Some people and some ideas that have influenced me and helped me in this regard. So, first we have Gurdjieff, one of my favorites, one of my spiritual heroes in a way. I'm not going to say much about Gurdjieff's, life and biography and stuff, but I won't say anything really at all. I will just say that he encouraged several different practices, and one of the main ones is what he called self-remembering. And my phrasing around that is re-presencing. And basically it's just kind of at every given moment, having heightened awareness and attention. It's practicing paying attention. Basically, it's the practice of paying attention, the practice of re-presencing ourselves. In the same way that when you're following your breath or something during meditation, and you kind of, you'll realize that, oh my God, I haven't been following my breath for like a minute or two or something because I was lost in thought, and then you snap back to your breath. It's that same idea, but just with everything, not just meditating, but just moving through the world moment by moment, snapping back to our awareness, snapping back to our attention instead of being lost in thought. So that's obviously related to sitting with and observing and training the puppy mind. And another reference point is the tradition that's usually associated with like tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and that is Dzogchen, D-Z-O-G-C-H-E-N. And Dzogchen is basically the practice of sitting with and acknowledging what that tradition sees as kind of the fundamental reality of our mind and consciousness, which is what they call Rigpa, and that is kind of luminous, lucid awareness, essentially. Luminous, I think that luminous is a good word. Lucid is a great word to describe it. This, and the idea is that that's the fundamental nature or reality of mind or consciousness underneath the puppy mind, essentially, right? And it's shining there, waiting for us to acknowledge it or access it or taste it. And I think that's beautiful. It's beautiful to consider that. It's beautiful to try to taste that and acknowledge that. And I think that when we start sitting with and training the puppy mind, then in my own experience, there is something like luminous, lucid awareness that's present that we are more likely to realize when we do these sorts of practices. And I think that kind of going through the next steps of this soul cultivation, coming from approaching those steps with that lucid, luminous awareness is a very beneficial foundation, right? And in the same way that my phrasing of the Gurdjieff thing, instead of self-remembering, I prefer represencing. And instead of Rigpa, I prefer luminous, lucid, unwounded consciousness. I've talked about unwoundedness in other videos, and that's at least very related to Dzogchen, at least in my understanding, or my version of that sort of thing. We can start realizing and accessing and tasting unwoundedness and spaciousness and stillness inside of us once we start sitting with and training the puppy mind. And it's powerful. It's extremely powerful. And it's very simple. It's very powerful and simple. And it is always present if we pay attention to it. Before I started kind of thinking about unwoundedness and having that as the most helpful term for me, I did usually think stillness and spaciousness. It's all related, it's all just kind of different language that's speaking to the same thing or something similar. And yeah, for years now, I go through waves of remembering and practicing this, but it's never too far away where, as I'm doing right in this moment, as I'm walking through this pine forest, I'm allowing myself to tap into the stillness or spaciousness inside me. And when I do that, I automatically feel more clarity and more lucidity, and when I'm in my puppy mind, which is very often, then I don't feel as clear or as spacious or as free. Again, freedom is a big part of this. It requires freedom to be able to go through this sort of process. It requires freedom to do any sort of meaningful self-work. And again, being constantly entangled by the puppy mind is not a condition of freedom. So I have been trying to practice this first step. And again, it's not like you go through that step and then you're on to the next one and then it's just like a purely linear thing at all. It's like this first step of sitting with and training the puppy mind, that step never ends. The puppy mind is always rearing its head. So this is a continuous process, a continuous practice, and each of these 4 steps is ongoing and interrelated and feeding off of each other. But I feel like this first step is very fundamental and foundational and without it, the other steps, in my experience, are more fragmented, you know. And so I hope that this makes sense. I think it does. It's pretty basic, but very powerful, very important. And I think that's where I'm gonna land it today. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections and questions or anything like that. So feel free to comment. And until next time, peace.